Hello.
Hi, good
Hello.
evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Jyoti Singhvi. I am a board member with the MIT Sloan Club of New York, and we have Dory Clark with us. Say hi, Dory. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes, just giving everyone some time to roll in. And we are in for a great conversation with Dory about all the wisdom she has in this book, The Long Game. And Dory, are those the books in the background? They look so good.
Those are a large quantity of The Long Game. That is correct.
They look beautiful.
Thank you. And thanks for the prop, Jyoti. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to get started in a couple minutes here.
Serves as a reminder that we are on stolen and settled condition. I invite all of us to contemplate and better
Able to mute our audience members.
care of the land that each of us inhabits. I would also like to acknowledge the generous support of our underwriters of the Kennedy Library Forum.
Whoever is the host actually has the capacity to unilaterally mute the participants.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to do that now, but I would like to ask everyone if they would please put their
Full instructions,
mute buttons on.
email, or comments on our YouTube page.
Okay. Dory, I muted you by mistake. Did you?
Opportunity
We're good. We're good.
All right, I'm going down the line.
with our distinguished guests this evening.
I just muted everybody. So Dory, you. Perfect. All right, we are going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Good evening, late good afternoon, depending upon where you are joining us from. Dory is in sunny, I want to say California, but sunny Florida. Look at her sun-filled, sun-drenched room with the beautiful yellow, The Long Game books. All right, Dory has been my speaker and guest for multiple times, and it's just always such a pleasure to host her, as she's full of amazing wisdom. And I have really enjoyed reading this book myself, and we're going to be in this great conversation with Dory and dive in deeper. The conversation today is going to be, it's a moderated fireside chat. It's going to be about 45 minutes. And later I will open it up to audience Q&A. However, I want to make it interactive. So if you have some questions, as we talk about different topics that Dory has covered, feel free to put them in the chat. If I'm able, I will definitely include them as part of the conversation. If not, then we can get to them later. Feel free to repost them if we couldn't get to your question. And here is Dory's bio. So Dory Clark helps individuals and companies get their best ideas heard in a crowded, noisy world. She has been named one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50. She was honored as the #1 communication coach by Marshall Goldsmith, leading Global Coaches Awards, and one of the top 5 communication professionals in the world by Global Gurus. Yay, go Dory! She is a keynote speaker and teaches for Duke University and Columbia Business School. She is the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of multiple books. Well, we have The Long Game, then there was The Entrepreneurial You, and Reinventing You, and Stand Out, which was named the #1 leadership book of the year by Inc. magazine. A former presidential campaign spokeswoman, Dory has been described by the New York Times as an expert at self-reinvention and helping others make changes in their lives. She's a frequent contributor to HBR and consults and speaks for clients such as Google, Yale University, and the World Bank. Forbes has declared that her insights connect marketing, social media, communications, learning technologies, and personal discovery to give us a blueprint for success in the future economy. She is a graduate of Harvard Divinity School, a producer of a multiple Grammy-winning jazz album, and a Broadway investor. And you can download her free long game strategic thinking self-assessment at a link, which I will share later in the comments here. Dory, welcome. Such a pleasure to have you here.
Oh
Well,
my goodness, Jyoti, thank you.
absolutely. And I see your Broadway stuff going on.
Yeah, we'll just do jazz hands, absolutely.
Dancing too today?
I mean, if folks want me to go TikTok, I can go TikTok.
Wow, awesome, awesome. I'm super duper excited, Dory. Welcome again, and let's get started. So Dory, tell me about the long game. What are you teaching us? What are you telling us in the long game? And I mean, it is what it sounds like, but do we really have to plan for it, or can it just kind of fall into place also?
So the reason that I wrote The Long Game, Jyoti, the way that I think about the book and describe the book is that essentially it is about how to apply the principles of strategic planning and strategic thinking, which, many of us, many Sloan grads here in the room do in their jobs all the time. But we very rarely turn the lens on ourselves and say, well, how do I apply strategic thinking to my own life, to my own career? Almost all of us are just besieged on a regular basis where, we've got way too many emails, way too many meetings. I literally had 3 coaching calls today with clients that said basically some version of, I just can't catch up. I always feel behind. And I think probably that's true for a lot of professionals today. And so, what do we do with that? I wanted to write a book that enables us to really find concrete strategies and to think a little bit more about, all right, clearly this is not a good way to live, right? I mean, yes, to your point, emergent possibilities are a great thing. We want some of that. But your whole life can't be emergent possibilities, or else all you're doing is reacting, right? I mean, most of us have some kind of goals, some kind of ambitions that we're striving for. And so the question is, how can we identify what that is? How can we carve out more space in our own busy lives for strategic thinking so that at a really basic level, we're able to accomplish more of what we care about and more of what we want?
Thank you so much. This is really helpful. Now, is this only good for people who are in their 20s and 30s? I mean, some of us in our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, I mean, are we too late in the game to plan it out? And what are you talking about in terms of the length of time?
Well, so long-term thinking obviously is somewhat subjective. It could mean a wide range of things. And certainly if you are in your 20s or 30s, yeah, you probably should be doing a lot of long-term thinking. That's helpful. But, the truth is, the way that I personally define strategic thinking is doing something today that helps make tomorrow better or easier. I mean, I'll give you a super pedestrian but very relevant example. Which is, it is a little bit difficult for most of us to will ourselves to work out, right? I mean, some people are really into it, but for a lot of us, it's like, oh, that would be a nice idea. Yeah, I should do that. And then, we come up with like any other excuse to not work out. And so what I would consider to be an example of long-term thinking is you leave out your workout clothes the night before and you wear the workout clothes and you literally don't take them off until you have worked out. And I do that. And some days that means that literally I'm doing every Zoom meeting I have in my workout clothes because I just can't get to it until the end of the day. But before the sun sets, I will have worked out because I'm wearing those workout clothes. That's not long-term exactly. I mean, it's literally just for the next 24 hours, but its impact is long-term because taken in the aggregate, you do that enough times and you become healthy instead of unhealthy. You become fit instead of unfit. So yes, I think there's a role for strategic thinking for people of all ages. I'll give you one more example, which is one of my favorites. My mom, when she was in her 50s, I got braces. I was 13. I got braces. Mm. And my mother also decided to get braces at the same time, which was a super weird thing to do at the time for a lady in her 50s, especially because, I mean, braces were not subtle then. This is not like, oh, she got Invisalign. No, she got like this complete mouth full of metal and it looked crazy. And all her friends are like, why are you bothering? Why are you doing that? And my mother said, you know what? I could be either 2 years older or I could be 2 years older with straight teeth. Now, fast forward, my mother's 84. My mother has straight teeth. She's been enjoying this for the past 30 plus years because of the investment she made in herself in the early 1990s. So I think a lot of us, it's like, oh, it's too late. I'm in my 50s. Excuse me, you pretty much have half your life to go. So we actually all should be thinking about long-term thinking.
This is amazing because I was just going to ask you, is it only pertaining to our careers? But you gave us two actual real life examples too. Now, when it comes to our careers or even life, I mean, everything is so intertwined these days. Are there certain strategies or a process you'd like us to follow as we think about long term? Because we all make our goals, and some of us are good at following those, steps towards the goals, and some of us we kind of fall by the wayside. So, what are your steps or processes?
Yeah. So when it comes to really following through on goals, I mean, there's lots of different pieces about all of this. What goals do I set and things like that. But assuming you know what your goals are, you're setting them, and we're talking about execution. I think there's a number of things we ought to keep in mind. But one of the things that I'm a big fan of is building forcing functions into our life. So, for instance, there's a woman that I profile in the long game named Sam Horn. And Sam had always had a dream of wanting what she called a year by the water. This was her personal digital nomad vision, right? And I say digital nomad, knowing that you're picturing some 20-year-old, but Sam is in her, I think, late 60s. So she had this vision that what she would really love to do is, she's a big water person. And so her dream is she'd spend an entire year sort of traveling around and staying in different places. And it would all be by the water. And it would be like, oh, she's rented a beach house on the ocean, or she's rented a lake house, or whatever it is. But she just really wanted to commune with that. That was her unique vision, but she never did it. And finally, she was very busy pre-COVID with travel. She just kind of burned herself out. And finally, she just kind of hit a point where she realized, I need to do this. I need to stop talking about it. I need to do it. And she set a date. She said, October 1st, that's the date that my year by the water begins. And she said that was so important and so transformative. She said if she had never actually set a calendar date, it wouldn't have happened, because you can always find a million excuses not to do something. Oh, but I have the dentist appointment, or, whatever. And having the date as the forcing function was really powerful for her. Another element that I think is similarly useful, depending on what your goals are and how you best function, is having the forcing function of a community. So there's a woman that I profile named Kim Cantor-Gianni, and her goal was around weight loss. She was really busy. She's a mom. She's a wife. She's an executive. Blah 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 blah. And the thing she seemed to never have time for was her health. So she wasn't eating as well as she could. She was not working out, and she had gained more weight than she wanted, and just nothing seemed to work. So what she decided to do was she created a pound-a-thon campaign. And she literally got all of her friends to donate a certain amount of money for every pound that she lost. And the donation would go to the local battered women's shelter. And so Kim at that point began to feel like, well, I'm not just doing it for me, I'm doing it for charity. I'm doing it for a charitable cause that I really care about. And also, frankly, how embarrassing if your friends are pledging and then you go out to eat with them and you're like, oh, and I'll have a triple Big Mac, right? She's not going to do that. So the power of community enabled her to lose the weight and keep it off.
Love those examples. Thank you so much. And then that leads me to another point you had mentioned in the book, and it's about, Colette, could you pin me back, please? So that was about these mental blocks and these mindset, blocks, barriers that we put, thank you, Colette, that we put on ourselves unknowingly often. So towards the end of the book, you had an example of one of these senior executive guys who said, well, I'm going to leave my company soon and then pursue the dream that I have. And then you spoke with him and you said, so when are you doing it? And you thought he would do that in a couple months, maybe. It's like, yeah, about in 5 years when everything is completely aligned. And again, there are different roadblocks or mental barriers. These are not even roadblocks, mental barriers that we have. And then what if my decision is wrong? What if I don't have the skills or I go on the wrong path? All of those things are just working up here. How do you help or suggest that we overcome those and be mindful and be aware of those?
Well, I think it's true. I mean, all of us worry obviously about not wanting to make a wrong decision. I mean, who wants that? But something that's important to keep in mind is actually a concept that Jeff Bezos talks about. And he's somebody who, in the corporate world really is a great long-term thinker. And he talks about the one-way door or the two-way door, right? And the truth is we have to understand almost every door is a two-way door. You go in, you don't like what you see, you come out. Like there's only a handful of things. Like if you have kids, for instance, that I'm afraid is a one-way door because you can't really get away with sending them back. But aside from that, you take a job, you don't like it. I mean, oh, but it'll be devastating. It'll look so bad on my resume. You know what? I mean, this is not the biggest problem in the world. If you hate the new job that you took, you can leave. It's okay. It will not devastate your career, I promise. And so many things, you move to a new city, you don't like it, you can move somewhere else, you can move back. So I think we often kind of overstate the irreparable changes that we feel like might happen when in most cases something is reversible. And I think to that point, one of the things that I'm a really big fan of, and certainly anybody who's familiar with the sort of, Silicon Valley ethos of the lean startup, is just what they do talk about, what is your minimum viable product? Well, ultimately it's like, what is the minimum viable test that you can do? Like, just see if you like something, if you think you want to switch careers, can you try it for a little period of time? I mean, I'll give you an example. In my first book, Reinventing You, I profiled this woman who I interviewed a career coach, and her career coach told me about this. I don't think a lot of people would admit this, but anonymously, her career coach told me about this. So this woman was dead set. She's like, I want to be a floral designer. And the career coach is like, okay, what experience do you have, that shows you'd like to be a floral designer? I love flowers. Oh, okay, great. Well, have you ever, do you know much about how floral design works? I don't need to. I know it would be the perfect career for me. And so the career coach is like, well, before you go all in, why don't you see if you can spend a day job shadowing someone? And the woman's like, oh, it's so unnecessary. But she relents and she goes and she job shadows a floral arranger. And meanwhile, she literally leaves at lunchtime and never comes back because she has decided by lunchtime that floral designing is a terrible job for her, because the one part she had never counted on, she liked flowers, but guess what? If you're a floral arranger, you are working in like 60-degree temperatures because it's cold, because you have to keep the flowers fresh. And she's like, it's too cold for me. And she realized it would never work, and she needed a new career aspiration. So in that case, pretty smart to spend half a day instead of spending, I don't know, years training for a career that it turns out you're going to hate later on. So the minimum viable intervention, I think, is really important to think about.
I love that, minimal viable intervention. Great. And you're such a good storyteller with all the acting and everything. It's so much fun to watch your stories. So that point leads me to the next. You have this theme of career waves. What are those? And does everybody have them? Do we need to put them in our careers? What are they?
Yeah, well, so in the long game, I talk about career waves, and where this came from is that what I discovered is a lot of times people sometimes feel a little stuck in their careers. They're like, I've hit a plateau, or, I'm stagnating, or I'm in a rut, or, whatever variation, but something along those lines. And I kept hearing it and hearing it. And what I came to realize is that the problem was largely that, it's a very human problem. People were doing something, and then they either got good at doing that thing, or at least they just got comfortable doing that thing. And so they kept doing it. And this is logical, but the problem is that's just not how the world works. What we are not robots, right? We are not an assembly line that's churning out pink widgets and you keep doing pink widgets. As humans, we need to be doing different things. And that's how our skills grow. That's how we are able to keep ourselves entertained. That's how we're able to make a bigger contribution. And so I identified when it comes to jobs or the work that we do, basically 4 main waves. And the problem is that sometimes people get stuck in one wave or another, and we have to unstick ourselves. No one probably is going to tell you like, hey, go to a new wave. We need to pick up on that and learn that. So the 4 waves, first of all, is the learning wave, which, probably makes sense to a lot of people. You got a new job, you got a new career, you need to take it all in. You're just like, okay, how does this place work? Who are the people? What do they do? What is this? So you do the learning wave for a while. That's great. But then at a certain point, and some people don't even get to this part, you have to start doing the creating wave, which is, okay, you've learned how the place works. Now come up with some ideas of your own. What's your take? What are your suggestions? How are you adding value to the place that you're at? Are you raising your hand and saying, well, what about this? Or how about this? Or whatever. But you've got to start contributing so you're not just the fly on the wall, right? And then we get to the next wave, which is a connecting wave. That becomes really important because if you want to make a bigger impact, you can't just, have your narrow little group. You need to have a wider group of connections. You need to know more people in your field, in your industry, both because it'll help you have better ideas and to spread the ideas that you have. And then finally, this is kind of the good part, right? Where you get to what I call the reaping wave, where it's like, oh, you figured this place out. You're dialed in. And a lot of people, if they're thinking in a very linear fashion, they're like, oh, well, I made it. I did what I need to do. Great. I'm just going to reap. But the problem is we can't just reap forever because the world changes, needs change, things change. And if you try to just reap forever, it's not going to go very well. I mean, you think about AOL was making a pile of money off of their dial-up internet access, and it works really, really well until it doesn't. And then you need something else. So what we need to do is we need to voluntarily disrupt ourselves and to switch at a certain point, from the reaping wave back into the learning wave. So we learn new things and keep growing and developing.
This is so great. And, this is like a career trajectory for anybody, new job, new business, etc. The 3 to 5 year period, which you fit so beautifully in the 4 waves. Now, what if, we're further along in our careers and we've done this multiple times, and you just kind of feel like a burnout, right? Oh, I've done this so many times, not again. How do you keep yourself motivated, or how do you the reaping wave is when everybody also gets very comfortable. Now this is the cushy period. I don't want to leave it. Like, how do you get out of it too? Like out of your comfort zone and keep reinventing yourself? That brings us to the other book, Reinventing You.
Yes, exactly. Well, I think if we're thoughtful about it, we need to look for the signs within ourselves, right? I mean, if you find yourself, listen to what you say, listen to the words that you're using. If you find yourself saying, oh, well, I could do that in my sleep, or, oh yeah, I mean, I'm kind of treading water here, or, oh, I've kind of I've been doing the same thing for a long time, or, whatever, oh, I'm in a rut. That's not good. This, it might not be intolerable right now, but at a certain point, it probably will become intolerable. And like a lot of things, you want to get the mole removed when it's a little spot. You don't want to get the mole removed when it's taken over half your arm, right? So you got to get out ahead of these things by being self-aware about where you are and what you're feeling. In The Long Game, I tell a story about Marshall Goldsmith, who some of you may have heard of if you're into executive coaching. He's a well-known executive coach, or you may have potentially seen or read his book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which is a big bestseller. And he tells a story about his early days in coaching. And he had this mentor who got him started. He was an academic, and there was this guy named Paul Hersey. And Paul was an early kind of coach / consultant. And Paul, at a certain point, just got too much work, more work than he could handle. And so he reaches out to Marshall and he says, well, Marshall, can you do what I do? Could I hire you as a subcontractor? And Marshall's like, okay, I guess so. And so it gets him into coaching. And within a few years, Marshall was raking it in. The clients loved him, and coaching paid a lot better than academia. So he was going all in. He was coaching all the time, taking all the assignments. And at a certain point, after a certain number of years, Paul pulled him aside and said, Marshall, I have to talk to you. I feel like you are not essentially living up to your potential. And Marshall was like, wait, what? Do the clients not like me? Like, what's going on? And Paul was like, no, the clients love you. That's the problem, because all you're doing is client work. All you're doing is selling your time for money. And you are not creating the ideas and the intellectual property that can be your legacy. And as Marshall said, he heard that, he took it in, and he kept doing what he was doing for like another 8 years because he liked making the money, and all of us have sort of struggled with this. But at a certain point, Marshall thought about it and he realized, you're right. I am not contributing all I could contribute. And he had knowledge to share. He had wisdom to share. And, it all takes different forms for all of us. But in Marshall's case, he started writing articles. He started writing books. He started speaking and sharing his methodologies, which now, have scaled and have helped a lot of people. But we have to ask ourselves, are we just going through the motions, sort of doing the thing we're good at, or should we be potentially doing something else so we could make a higher contribution at a certain point? That's not to say, oh, you all have to go work, building wells in Africa or whatever. That's not the point, and that's not the answer. But the question is, it's worth asking ourselves, are we in a rut, or are there things that we could do and tweak that would enable us to better make the contribution that only we can?
Absolutely. And the contribution, and also at the same time, are we enjoying what we're doing? So he was loving it while making a contribution. So he continued, and then he's like, I'm ready for a bigger impact. So then he moved on to doing bigger things. Along those lines, you spoke about, or in the book you speak about building a life portfolio. Tell us a little bit more about that, and if there is a framework we need to follow to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I really realized, Jyoti, as I was writing The Long Game, is in some ways there are just these uncanny parallels between, writing a book about strategic long-term thinking in our lives and in our careers, and frankly, investing books. As I thought back to books that I had read about, how to navigate the stock market or how to create, wealth for yourself, I was like, oh, wow. In a lot of ways, these are the same things. You talk about the power of compound interest, right? Compound interest is incredibly powerful when it comes to building your financial portfolio. Frankly, it's also extremely powerful in building your life portfolio, because we, over time, the truth is for almost all of us, even if I told you, oh, you know what you need to do? You need to allocate an extra 10 hours a week to doing blah, blah, blah. You're like, come on, you dumb idiot. Like, I don't have 10 hours a week. I am optimized up the wazoo. Like, I've already cut out all the low hanging fruit. Like, I am bursting. And, it's just irrational to tell people, oh, you need to allocate some huge amount of time. We don't have a huge amount of time, but I do think that for almost all of us, we could get just a little bit smarter around the margins about, could you find a way to whittle out a half an hour a week? Could you find a way to whittle out even an hour a week? Just by being a little bit choosier, let's say, about some of the emails you respond to, some of the people you say yes to. And I think the answer is probably yes. Most of us, recognize like, okay, yeah, I could probably buy myself back an hour. Well, it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you take even an hour a week and you compound it over a year, over 2 years, all of a sudden, this is kind of an enormous amount of time where you're able to build up expertise that could really be quite valuable. And so, to this point, also in terms of investing, right? If you know one thing about investing, the first piece of advice is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't literally have all your money in one stock. Bad idea. You want a diversified portfolio. And so similarly, what I discovered is that for so many of us, it turns out that we're kind of doing the same thing in our professional lives, right? It's like, oh, well, I'm an accountant, so I just, do accounting things. It's like, well, that's great. But if there's a disruption, whether it's an internal disruption, like maybe you just suddenly decide you don't like it, or, maybe there's an industry disruption, right? Everybody's talking about AI and robotics and like, it's going to eat half the jobs. Who knows, right? But if you have all your eggs in one basket, it's a little bit precarious. And so I am a believer in diversification. And so Google, for instance, very famously, and, caveat asterisk, I understand a lot of people at Google don't even do this, I mean, it's still a thing, but a lot of people don't do it because frankly, it's hard. Frankly, it's a lot easier to just do one thing. But nonetheless, at Google, they have popularized the concept of taking 20% time, which is allocating 20% of your time to speculative, essentially long range activities that may or may not pay off. And this is how Google News was created. This is how Gmail was created. Some of these things can become major bets that really pay off. A lot of them don't, but some do. And I believe that we ought to be making 20% time bets in our own careers. And if 20% is too much given your circumstances, fine, do 10, fine, do 5. But we can't afford to be 100% in on just one thing. It's very risky for us. But being able to hedge our bets by learning and exploring in other areas, frankly, it's more interesting, keeps things lively for us, but it also enables us to keep learning about valuable things and gives us new opportunities.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because everybody just gets so busy with whatever they're doing, the business or work. And like you said, also you get new perspectives from another industry. There's another friend who comes from very high luxury, like haute luxury, and he recently, and that was watches and jewelry, just moved to NFTs, and that's very, very impressive. Very digitized, but very cutting edge, and he's doing great there. So just staying on the cutting edge.
Yeah, well, you're an example of this, Jyoti. I mean, I know you have your feet in multiple things. You have your communications coaching that you do. You also have your work, I believe, in the jewelry space as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes you're just being multi-passionate or multi-interested in multiple things, and just kind of moving along those lines. Same as you, Dory. You have multiple things going on too. There's a very interesting topic you talk about, which is distance to empty. What is that all about?
Yeah, so this is a concept that I talk about in the long game, which is borrowed from a friend of mine named Dave Crenshaw. And Dave is great. He is a time management and productivity expert. He's done a lot of LinkedIn learning courses, for instance. And one of the principles that he abides by is what he calls distance to empty. And so you might recall this phrase from your car's dashboard. A lot of cars these days will tell you how many miles you have to go before you run out of gas, which is a useful piece of information. And he likes to think about our days like this, because for a lot of us, one of the biggest problems that we have, frankly, is, especially with like work from home, especially from the blurring boundaries between work and, life and whatever, we kind of never stop working. We kind of never turn things off, right? It could be 10 o'clock at night and we're on our email doing these things. And so Dave is a big believer in having a sort of fixed shut off time and being really clear about that. And this applies at the micro level and at the macro level. And so if we think about distance to empty, it's okay, well, he thinks it's really important to set a fixed time after which you will not work. And, you can't be crazy. If you've been working until 10 o'clock at night, you can't suddenly say, well, starting tomorrow, I'm going to quit work at 5. This is probably not going to work. You have to kind of dial it back, almost like you're resetting your circadian rhythms. But getting clear on what your distance to empty is, how much time do you have before you will stop for the day? That's very important. And similarly, if we think about it for vacations, right? So many of us, I mean, this is an epidemic in America. You always hear about that. A lot of people, they have vacation time. They never use it. They never take it. And that's obviously, kind of counterproductive, but we do it oftentimes because we just can't even imagine how we would do it, right? Oh gosh, well, I'd just be so backed up. but getting clear on, oh, if I have, this work that I'm doing, it enables you to sort of say, oh, well, I guess I probably could take a week off because I have figured out a way to be away from my desk, to be away from my work and have it covered and feel okay about it. So distance to empty, I think, is a useful concept for all of us.
Yeah, just being very mindful of when can I have that empty mind space and empty vacant space just to kind of think or unwind. So important, especially, with so many things that we're juggling these days. Has that changed for people, especially around the pandemic? And because when work, life, kids, family, everybody, elderly, sick, everybody's just kind of merged in. Any suggestions around that or around the pandemic period?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The pandemic messed up a lot of things for a lot of people. I mean, we know there were good things as well. There are many people that have decided that on the whole, they actually like working from home. They, not having to commute, that's a great thing. But there was a lot of challenges that we all had to navigate as well. And, some of it was the act of navigating boundaries at work and when you were going to be available and how, especially it's how can we step away from it mentally, right? One of the interesting interviews that I did for a previous book called Stand Out was with David Allen, who, speaking of productivity experts, is another well-known productivity expert. He created the Getting Things Done methodology. And he had something to say that I thought was quite powerful. He said that, when it comes to having like great ideas, it's not that you actually need time for that, right? It's not like, oh, wow, I'm going to allocate, the next 6 hours to having a great idea. Like, that's not how it works. It's not like, oh, good. If I'll have a good idea if I have 6 hours, but I'll have a great idea if I have 8. Like, that's not how good ideas work, right? A good idea can come to you in an instant, but the problem is that so often it doesn't. And it's not about the time we allocate. It is about the mental space. He said that for so many of us, we're not able to even let our brains go to that place where we're able to make creative connections because we're so bogged down in these minutiae, in these little details about, oh, but I need to do this. And oh my God, I didn't send him the thing. And, all this stuff. And so we're stuck in the weeds when to have creative ideas and make connections, we need to be looking at the horizon. So I think for all of us, the more that we can try to be gentle with ourselves and create spaces where we say, all right, I'm done for the day now. Or, okay, I've done as much as I can. I'll pick it up tomorrow and I'm not going to beat myself up about it. That is valuable.
And Dory, are you also a proponent of that, creating that quiet space besides shutting down, but creating specific quiet time blocks or even meditative blocks? Do you think those might be helpful?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think that if we are not thoughtful about this, the default that we fall into is just, oh, well, I'm going to leave my inbox open and I'll just respond to messages all day. I mean, that's pretty much the default for most of us. So if we want to change that and do something different, we need to be very thoughtful and conscious about it. And frankly, we need to protect it. I'm showing my fists deliberately because it is a battle we have to fight and no one else is going to fight it for us. Because the truth is, it is kind of, let's be honest, it's in everyone else's best interest for you to be their little task rabbit and answer every message within 30 seconds, because then they never have to wait. And, it's great for them. Now, meanwhile, you're never going to get promoted. You're never going to advance because all you're doing is like helping everybody else with their stupid little things. You're not doing the substantive deep work that you need to, but that's not their concern. So if you want to protect your turf, you've got to fight for your turf and be really diligent about, no, I needed to carve out 3 hours to work on the report this morning. And that is what I am going to do. That is the most important task of the day.
Thank you so much for just really pounding your fist for that or on that, or because we all kind of fall into that pitfall. So yeah, note to self, put that time block in and fight for it. Dory, there are two very interesting topics you're talking about, and possibly they are contradictory. So I'm going to ask you about them. You talk about optimizing for interesting and deciding what to be bad at. So tell us a little bit more about those.
That's right. Well, I guess the answer is decide to be bad at the uninteresting things, right? Then we're good. But yes, let me explain both of these things. And before I do, a message came in, and I think it went to me directly, so I'll just call it out, Jyoti, because we love questions from all of you guys, so please feel free to type them in. But Bill wrote in, and he says, I consider myself to be a very busy and pretty organized person. I attribute this to carving out slack time in my schedule. This serves multiple purposes. Nothing's pre-scheduled. It's just time to catch up or think about something completely off the wall or not think at all. What do you think about slack time for busy people? And yeah, I want to give you props, Bill. I think it's a good idea. Clearly it's working for you, which is great. But I think that one of the big problems that we all face, and frankly, I mean, just to bring it back, right? The whole point of the long game is about strategic thinking, long-term thinking. The reason we do that is that the things that matter to us, oftentimes, they just take a while. And so we have to be kind of, obviously, if we could have it all tomorrow, then great, but we can't for things that are meaningful. There's a lot of steps between here and there. And so in doing that, it's very easy to get off course and get distracted by these little things. And it becomes a particularly acute problem if we, as so many of us are so scheduled completely back to back that, like during my book launch, for instance, which was kind of a ridiculous example. But I think for a lot of us, we live our lives like this all the time. Some days I'd have 9 meetings. I mean, basically it really was back to back. Maybe they'd be like 15 minutes, but I mean, you're really literally like barely even able to go to the bathroom. It's just back to back. And in a situation like that, we know emergencies happen, right? Like this is the thing. Yes, emergencies happen. We don't know when, we don't know what form it will take, but emergencies happen. So one of the pieces of slack time that I've built into my schedule, actually starting about 1.5 years ago, is that I'm taking Fridays off. Now, Fridays, what would I like to do on a Friday? Well, I'd like to, meet up with friends or catch up on some stuff or do some reading or whatever. Well, sometimes that's what happens. And sometimes what happens on Friday is literally what happens on this Friday. What happened on this Friday is my neighbor's kitchen sink somehow overflowed and leaked through to my bathroom and flooded my bathroom. And I somehow had to spend about 4.5 hours dealing with that. And there's a million professional examples of those kinds of things too. If we don't have slack in our schedules, everything is going to get derailed. It's like if there's no slack in traffic, that's how you get 10 miles worth of car crashes on I-95, right? You need to have the margin between the cars so that if there's a problem, the problem can stop and not create the chain reaction. So I certainly endorse that, absolutely. Anyway, I just wanted to address that while it came in. But Jyoti, sorry, can you remind me what your question was? Oh, you're muted right now.
Yeah, if you could tell us about optimizing for interesting and deciding what to be bad at, because often we don't do, especially the latter. We want to be good at everything. And I think this also relates to what you were just talking about. Like a lot of interesting things do come in and you want to take it or not take it. Maybe I'm not talking about the right topic. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, no, you're talking about great topics. This is fantastic. So yes, optimize for interesting is a concept that I talk about in the long game. Basically, an idea that I have there is, it all started actually because one of the hats that I have worn over the years was, gosh, now probably 15 years ago, I directed a documentary film. And it was an environmental documentary. And there was a woman who we profiled. She was, I mean, my gosh, she's still alive. But she was 80 when we started this film project. And she was very heroic. She was kind of like, let's call her like maybe an Erin Brockovich of the Northeast, essentially. She was this housewife that almost single-handedly led the successful cleanup of one of America's most polluted rivers. And so we did this environmental documentary to try to really understand, like, all right, how did she learn how to do that? And, what were the strategies? What were the forces that she marshaled in order to be able to get it done? And she was really cool. But one of the stories that she told, which really stayed with me, was that as she was leaving for college, this is somebody who turned out to be a very adventurous woman, but as she was like walking out the door, leaving for college, her mother gave her this last piece of advice. And her mother said, well, whenever you have a choice, choose the more interesting option. And I thought that was really fantastic. I mean, ultimately it's like, well, what do you want your life to end up like? I mean, the truth is sometimes you really don't have a choice. You just have to suck it up and you do what you have to do. But when you do have a choice, why would we not pick the most interesting? Sometimes we forget that, right? We forget, oh, well, I should do the most lucrative or what have you. I mean, yeah, sometimes, but honestly, if you want to have the kind of life that is thrilling to you, picking what is most interesting to you is not a bad way to do it. Now, the other point you talk about is a topic that I addressed in the long game called choosing what to be bad at. Now, where this comes from is ultimately there was a fantastic book about a decade ago that came out by Frances Fry, who's a professor at Harvard, and Ann Morris, her partner and collaborator, and it was called Uncommon Service, and it was about service businesses basically, and it was trying to answer the question. This is a very philosophical one, right? Of why is it that most businesses are just like, it's not that they're terrible. Like terrible ones usually go out of business, but most businesses are just like, meh. Like they're just so unexciting, right? It's very rare that there's a business that everybody's like, oh my God, it's so fantastic, right? And so they wanted to understand, why is everything so meh? And what they discovered is that at a really fundamental level, everybody wants to pick what they're going to be great at. Oh, we're going to be great at this, and we're going to be great at this and this and this. But what the businesses in their imagination kind of thought is like, okay, well, we'll be great at this, and then we'll be like, okay, we'll be good at everything else. And this is, of course, completely irrational, because you cannot, just in terms of like bandwidth, you cannot be excellent, amazing, perfect at this one thing and then average at everything else. Not correct. If you're going to be excellent at something, like the best, you have to pick something that you're going to be terrible at, because there's only so much energy. And it is like that for us, right? And so one of the most important things we can do, if we don't want to just be totally boring, across the board average, if we truly want to be great at something, we have to pick what we want to be bad at. What are we willing to be bad at, right? Like, can you actually be a super successful executive and, make home cooked meals for your family every night? I mean, I guess you could if literally you didn't do anything else, but that's challenging. You got to pick, like, where's the thing you're going to be bad at. For me, it actually is cooking. I'm actually very excited because I on Mondays I get a delivery from a private chef, and she handles that for me, because otherwise, it would be hard for me. I'd be like all, I don't know, sauteing kale or something, and I wouldn't have time to be able to do a webinar for the Sloan Club. So I'm making my choice. I'm drawing my line in the sand, and I think we all need to do that as well.
I think that's really important, because you're calling out on that it's okay to be bad at something. And in today's culture, nobody talks about being bad at something. They always say, focus on the thing that you want to be good at. Yes, but then you feel so bad about being bad at the other things. But it's just so good. Yes, those 4 things, I'm going to be just bad at it and just put them to rest, and that's absolutely okay. I love that idea. Really great.
Yeah, we got to pick and we got to let it go.
Let it go. Unless you release and prune, you can't blossom and grow. Love it. I want to ask a very important question, and then we'll open it up to audience question Q&A. So feel free to put your questions here in the chat box. But here's a question. This question is about networking. This is a very, very important thing a lot of us Sloanies actually learned at MIT Sloan. But you talk about 3 forms of networking. And then you also have another caveat, which you say, do not even have an ask for the first year. So if you could enlighten us on that, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 3 different types of networking that I talk about in the long game, I'll go into detail about all these, but there's short term, there's long term, and then there's what I coined this infinite horizon networking. That's the sexy, exciting, right? So short term networking is basically what I would call like the caricature of networking, that sort of networking done badly, where it's like, I'm going to go to the Chamber of Commerce mixer and I'm going to get a new client, you know? And like, okay, maybe that happens sometimes, but it's like, oh, it's a little gross. It's a little transactional. It's like, oh, maybe I can sell them on my thing. And a lot of times it doesn't feel good for us to do it. And it certainly doesn't feel good for the people on the receiving end to just feel like, oh my God, all this person wants from me is my money, right? So that is what a lot of people think that networking is, period, end of story. I want to suggest that is not actually networking. That is just networking executed very poorly. Instead, what good networkers do by and large is what I will call long-term networking. And that is basically like, you know what? I don't know what this person can do for me. I don't really care, but the person is interesting. And, we have something in common. They, probably at some point in the future, they could do something for me. I can maybe do something for them. I don't have an agenda, but we're in the same realm. I want to get to know them. And then, as we're friends, like stuff will come up, right? And we can do things for each other. That's great because it's not like they need a thing. It's that they want to get to know you as you. And that's terrific. So I would say that's a much better form of networking. But the part that I wanted to highlight is the infinite horizon networking, because that's the part that even good networkers often omit or forget about, which is building relationships with people that on the surface are completely irrelevant to you. People often don't bother with this because it doesn't seem that useful. It's like, okay, well, I get it that I shouldn't have an agenda, but like, what do I even have in common with this person? They're like a deep sea diver, or, they're a Dalmatian breeder. Like, what do I do with that? But I think that actually some of the most meaningful and interesting connections come from the people who seem very, very random, because they are truly the ones that are exposing you to ideas and information that you never would get otherwise. And that can be really powerful and transformative.
That's really helpful, Dory. Thank you so much. And then along those lines, can I just ask this question? What if somebody is looking for a job or looking for clients or looking to get connected to the higher ups in their organization, and they are short on time? How do they build those relationships fast and make it productive for everybody?
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, there are certainly legitimate times when, you do have some kind of a near-term pressure that you need to solve. So for that, this is where you need to turn to people in your existing network, right? It's not a time to be meeting new people directly. It's a fine time to meet new people indirectly. And here's what I mean. So if I have never met you, don't know you at all, let's say I'm just trolling around on LinkedIn. I'm like, oh, Jyoti, seems like she probably knows someone. She went to Sloan. She's probably well connected. I know. I'll introduce myself. Hi, Jyoti. I'm Dory. I need a job, and it looks like you know some people. Maybe you could hook me up with the job. You're gonna be like, what? Like, who is this ridiculous person who I don't even know, and they're coming at me with something, right? You're gonna dismiss it out of hand. But on the contrary, if I'm trying to get to you, if I reach out to my friend that already knows me, already likes me, already has a history with me, and I say, oh, hey, I really need a favor. I see Jyoti. Would you connect us? Because I'd really love to do an informational interview with her. That actually would work just fine. So, not because I'm coming at you with the thing that I need, but because you are doing a favor for the person you already have a relationship with. So ultimately, if you need something fast, don't go to strangers, go to your existing network and see if you can get them to leverage their political capital on your behalf.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those insights, Dory. Thank you. I am going to open it up to audience Q&A. We have a question from Patricia. What do you think of Lunch Club as an Infinite Horizon networking opportunity?
Yeah, thank you, Patricia. So I have never done Lunch Club personally, but if I understand the model correctly, I think it is a thing where you sign up and you're like, hey, I'll have lunch with somebody, and then you kind of get matched up with somebody, which could be a little bit potentially random, if I understand correctly. And if that's the case, yeah, actually, I think that's a great idea. I would also say that, I'm a big fan of alumni activities, actually. I mean, it's within a narrower band, I would say, like MIT Sloan Club stuff is great. I mean, everybody's sort of gone into business, but it's different facets of business. That is good and that's interesting. I would even say, think about your undergrad alma mater, because if you do alumni activities with them, because people have so many different majors, you often can really interact with people that have gone off in a million different directions. And that's an interesting way to tap infinite horizon as well. Another one that I love, which could be done virtually, like on Zoom, but also now that in person is starting up a little bit more, now that people seem a little more comfortable interacting in with humans. I always was a big fan of co-hosting dinner gatherings, and I would ask a friend to just invite like 4 people, and I'd invite 4 people, and then we can cross-pollinate our networks. And sometimes you could even instruct your friend, like, invite the most interesting but random people and then see what happens. That could be fun.
Dory, those are fantastic ideas. And I love your idea of dinner gatherings. I've been to a couple of Dory's dinner gatherings, and I think that's a phenomenal way to meet interesting people outside of your network. And then I just have a plug for 2 other things, since you spoke about alumni networks, which are related to MIT or MIT Sloan. And I think it's going to be really beneficial to all of you guys. The MIT Alumni Advisors Hub is a phenomenal network, which was started a couple of years ago. And there are lots of MIT alums and Sloan alums who are willing to speak to you, advise you, mentor you. And it's a really user-friendly platform. I will put the link here in a little bit. And then another thing is the MIT. So I am creating mastermind groups for the MIT Sloan Club of New York, and we hope that we're going to expand it over to other cities and other MIT groups. So if that's of interest to you, please just either write something here, yes, tell me more about the mastermind, or private message me. That would be great. Thank you. All right, any other questions we have from the audience members? Questions for Dory, because this was a lot of great information Dory shared with us, a lot to digest. So take a few seconds and think about anything you have. I mean, I can ask more questions, but I just want to pause for a little bit just to see what else comes here.
Thanks, Jyoti. And I'll just mention, I'll type into the chat box here for folks who are interested. I have a free self-assessment that I created based on the long game. So it's like a long game strategic thinking self-assessment. And if you're interested, you can get it for free. It's at doryclark.com/thelonggame. Awesome.
Awesome. All right. So how do you create boundaries? So Naria, beautiful name. Naria asks, how do you create boundaries mentally to step away? Example, not thinking about work over the weekend.
Yeah, well, that's hard for a lot of us, right? Like the sort of racing mind and racing head and whatever. And I think that one of the most important things to keep in mind is our minds are racing for a reason, right? Which is, I mean, sometimes it's just like a crazy habit that we get into, but also there's a grain of truth in it, which is like, oh my God, something might happen, right? And so I think the way that we can relax is to set up protocols such that we feel okay that bad things are not going to happen if we tune out. So I think that's really the crucial thing. So part of it is about, for instance, setting up the right protocols with your team. Because if you say, look, you could say to them, for instance, I'm trying to check my email less on the weekend. So if there is an emergency, if there's something really important, text me. Okay, do that so you make sure I see it. And then that way, if there's not a text message, all right, there's probably not an emergency. Also, you can create outlet valves. So if you've been checking your email like all the time on the weekend, right? It's a little hard to go to cold turkey and like not do it at all. I wouldn't recommend that. But what I would say is, check it like once on Saturday morning, check it once on Sunday morning, just to make sure everything's okay. But then don't check it in between. Like give yourself these pockets and then say, I give myself permission to let it go because I looked at what's there. Nobody's sending me a text message. Everything's okay. It can probably wait.
And along those lines, Dory, those are some great tips. how do you like clear that mental chatter or that stress or that worry about a project? Like, how do you compartmentalize and not be thinking about it while hanging out with your family?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not easy, right? I think a lot of it really is, when there's mindfulness education or whatever, a lot of it where they train you with your breath, right? Your breath is really boring. In case you've ever like noticed, like focusing on breathing, that's boring. And the point of it is, oh, okay, my mind is going to wander and I have to keep bringing it back. Okay, it's going to wander. Oh, bring it back. And similarly, for at least a while until you get out of the habit, you probably are going to worry, you are going to ruminate, you are going to think about work. So you've got to notice that, forcibly bring yourself back. I think part of it too is trying to put yourself in activities or situations that are conducive to kind of essentially getting a flow state. So it's hard to think about work, right? If you're in something that really requires a lot of your concentration, then it is harder for you to be thinking about work projects because you're like, no, I'm focused. Like I've got to make sure I don't fall off the water skis or whatever, whereas if you're just kind of lounging around and everybody's watching TV, well, it doesn't seem that bad to be thinking about work because, oh, well, this isn't really high quality anyway. So I think those are some of the things I'd suggest.
I love that. It's just so important to be mindful and just kind of be disciplined about it and be aware. There's another question. We'll make this the last question, and then after that, Dory, I'd love to hear a little bit about your recognized expert group right ask question. Okay, so so this is a question for you. What good CRM or contact software would you recommend for personal use? I want to track all my contacts, and Apple's contacts app doesn't have many features.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you what I use personally, which is called Zoho. It's like Soho, but with a Z, Z-O-H-O. It's not that expensive. And honestly, I just use it for CRM, but it seems like it actually does a lot of different things. So that's what I use personally. I'll also say too, that depending what you want it for, sometimes we might think we need a sort of technical solution and sometimes we don't. Like, I don't know. I get clients sometimes and they're like, oh, I need to track my most important contacts to make sure that I'm emailing them regularly. And so I need a CRM. And so, I'll ask, I'll be like, well, how many people are you talking about? Like, who are your most important clients? And they're like, well, it's like 30 people. I'm like, you could use Excel for that actually. So I think it's just making sure that before you invest in anything that you're, sort of thinking about, well, how would I use that? And what would it be for? So that's my quick take.
Thank you, Dory. That was really helpful. Don't use a sword for where a needle could work for you. So really appreciate that. And Zoho, I'll check that out. So Recognized Expert Group, tell us a little bit about it because you've made waves with it and you've really helped a lot of people with that.
Oh, well, thank you, Jyoti. I appreciate it. Yeah, one of the things that I started 6 years ago now, I actually wrote about this and chronicled it in my previous book, Entrepreneurial You, is an online course and community called Recognized Expert. And it's as the name implies, it's intended for professionals that are looking to essentially build their brand and build their platform, whether it's inside their company or outside their company in their field. How do you, you're great at what you do. How do you get better known for it? And so we, share strategies and techniques and, really have a great community around that. So I do get, cohorts of people through it. About 700 people have been through the program. So it's really been a joy to run that and to see people being able to thrive and to get more recognition. I mean, our members have been we have folks in the community who've been on Good Morning America, who've been on the Tim Ferriss podcast, who have had a TED Talk that's 1 million people have watched, all kinds of amazing things.
That's awesome. That's really great. Thanks, Dory. Now, any last words of advice, pearls of wisdom, anything else that you want to share with us that we didn't get to talk about?
Oh my gosh, thank you. Well, the last thing that I'll say, as we think about long-term thinking, your strategic vision, sometimes people, I feel like, get a little bit hung up because they say, well, if I had a big long-term goal, 20-year goal or whatever, I just, I don't know if this can be my goal because I don't even know how I would accomplish it. It just seems too big. It seems too far away. And one of the things that I like to encourage people to think about is it's actually great that you don't know how to do it. It's fine. It would be so hubristic to think that you could actually create today a viable 20-year plan. Like, do you know what the world's going to be like in 2042? I don't. So like, it would be ridiculous. Anything we came up with, like it just wouldn't be relevant. It wouldn't make sense. I mean, we could be, I don't know, like everything could be delivered by drones by then. I have no idea. So it's fine to have big long-term goals and plans that you don't know the answer to, or that you don't know how to do it, because nobody knows how to do it because the world's changing. What you need is an intention. And, all you need is like the long-term vision of it. And then the next best step. You don't need to know how to take every step to get 20 years down the line. You just need to know what you do tomorrow. What's the next best step that can move you closer to it? And then you can monitor and adapt and evolve between now and then.
Thank you. Thank you. That really helps us stay inspired and not get disappointed by not knowing the steps. So really appreciate that last tip, along with everything else that you have told us about. It was extremely insightful, lots of little nudges and pounds. So we appreciate that loving, gentle push. Dory, you're amazing. And thank you, everyone. Dory, where can we find you and find the book?
Well, thank you so much, Jyoti. And of course, you are a fantastic interlocutor. So I really appreciate you hosting me and your great questions. So yeah, for folks who are interested in the long game, so I mentioned the self-assessment, which is doryclark.com/thelonggame. And then if you're interested in picking up a copy of the book, certainly you can get it on Amazon, and also on my website, which is doryclark.com/longgame without the. There's links on there to places that you can buy it. All the different places around the world, like Amazon.uk or Amazon.ca or Indigo, or all the different places that one could might prefer to purchase. Or what is it? IndieBound is where you can buy it from your local independent bookstore. So yeah, you can check it out in all of those places.
Thank you, Dory. And thank you so much, everyone else, for being here and sharing that precious time with us this afternoon, evening. Dory, you were amazing. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jyoti, and thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.